The laughter echoed through the great hall of the treaty spire, a jagged monolith of obsidian and light glass that speared the frozen sky of Zelvago's prime. Dozens of alien envoys wheezed, hooted, or chirped in their own fashion of mockery, staring at the limp, battered heap in the center of the chamber. The Warbeast lay motionless, its once glorious carapace scorched and shattered, one leg twisted grotesquely beneath its massive frame. A single, cracked ocular plate still glowed faintly, flickering like a dying ember. High Diplomat Kryn of the Valari flared his neck sacs with amusement and pointed a digit at the heap. This is what the Mordren bring to the peace front. Several others burst into renewed laughter deep, resonant whoops from the bulbous-bodied Treller, shrill cackles from the spindly Ulmari. Only the Mordren delegation remained silent, their faces unreadable behind obsidian armor. General Vorak, the Mordren military envoy, stood rigid, fists clenched. The Warbeast, once revered as their most powerful biomechanical construct, had fallen in the trial demonstration, a catastrophic systems failure during the stress test before the Galactic Council. It wasn't just embarrassing. It was catastrophic for their standing. Looks like it tripped over its own pride, chuckled Ambassador Henriks of the Varn Coalition. And then, unnoticed at first, someone stepped forward from the human delegation seated at the far end of the hall. A man in a worn navy blue jacket, boots still caked with red Martian dust. His face was sunburnt, and his jaw bore the faintest hint of a healing bruise. He hadn't spoken once during the proceedings. "Don't laugh at the tool when it's the hand that matters," said the man. Heads domed, scaled, translucent turned, Kryn blinked his vertical pupils. "And who are you, dirt breather?" Gavran Miles, he said. "Systems engineer, not a soldier, not a diplomat, but I know how things break, and how they can be fixed." The laughter faltered, replaced by an awkward silence. Vorak glowered at Gavran, unsure whether to feel insulted or intrigued. Gavran took a step toward the broken Warbeast. "If you're all so sure it's worthless, then you won't mind if I take a look." Kryn made a scoffing noise. "What, you intend to repair a Mordren Warbeast with a wrench and some duct tape?" Gavran didn't answer. He approached the husk, scanning the exposed wiring and cracked plating. The hull was scorched where the energy capacitors had overloaded. The leg servos were fused. Bioconnective tissues had begun to deteriorate from shock trauma. But beneath it all, he saw something familiar, a hybrid interface system not unlike Earth's early neural link prototypes. Vorak stepped beside him. "This machine is bound by Mordren code and biology." "You cannot begin to understand it," Gavran shrugged. "Maybe, but it looks like you tried to mix too many control layers without a stabilizing core. It's not dead, it's confused." The Ulmari ambassador sneered. "And what do you propose, human?" "A pep talk?" "No," Gavran muttered. "I propose letting me try before you throw it into a scrapyard." Vorak eyed him for a long moment. He turned to the other Mordren and gave a short nod. "1 hour, if you make it worse, you'll answer for it." Gavran set to work. He didn't have Mordren tools, but he had a portable interface kit and one stubborn streak honed by years fixing malfunctioning drones in Martian windstorms. He rerouted a power line through a bypass grid and used a feedback loop to stabilize the neural matrix. The biotissue was too far gone in places, so he disconnected the pain receptors entirely. The machine didn't need to feel pain. It needed to move. As he worked, several of the alien envoys gathered closer, amusement replaced by wary curiosity. A low hum began to rise from the Warbeast's chest cavity. Then its remaining eye flared brighter. Gavran stepped back just as it twitched once, then again, and slowly raised its head. The hall fell silent. "Stand," Gavran said softly. The Warbeast's limbs shuddered. The twisted leg was still useless, but the others locked into place. It pushed itself upright with a grinding roar of servos and strained hydraulics. The cracked armor hissed as internal fluids leaked, but the machine stood. Kryn's neck sacs deflated. Vorak's eyes widened. "How?" Gavran wiped sweat from his brow. I told you it wasn't dead, you just didn't listen. The Warbeast took a step forward, then another, lopsided but mobile. The crowd parted, stunned into silence. Gavran was already limping from a cut on his leg, sustained when a sharp shard from the beast's flank had nicked him, but he ignored it. "Why help them?" asked Henrik, stepping beside him. "You're not Mordren. Their failure helps your people." "I'm not here to win points," Gavran said. "I'm here to stop a war before it starts." The council reconvened the next day. The Warbeast, now partially restored, stood beside the Mordren envoys. Its presence was no longer a joke. Gavran sat beside it, knees sore, hands blistered. High Diplomat Kryn still looked irritated. "So the human fixed your toy. What now?" Vorak stepped forward. "Now it walks and it fights." Gavran groaned softly. "Walks, sure, but fights not yet. We must show strength," Vorak insisted. "You'll show weakness if it collapses again mid-demo," Gavran said. "Give me a week." "I'll stabilize it." The council gave him 4 days. He worked in the Mordren hangars, surrounded by engineers who didn't trust him, warriors who barely tolerated his presence. He didn't sleep much, and his leg got infected. He went to the infirmary on day 2, where a stern female medic from the Frown species cleaned the wound and prescribed a course of antibiotics. "You'll need to rest that leg," she said. "After the test," Gavran replied. He adjusted the internal gyros, replaced a melted capacitor with a salvaged Varn power cell, and reprogrammed the limb response thresholds. He didn't try to make the Warbeast whole. He made it functional. Reliable. On the 4th day, the Warbeast walked into the trial arena under its own power. It faced down a simulated threat course turrets, drones, shifting terrain. It took hits. It limped. But it kept moving. The crowd didn't laugh this time. When it reached the final objective and fired its plasma cannon, albeit with a half-second delay, the arena erupted in stunned silence, followed by scattered applause. Even Kryn looked begrudgingly impressed. Gavran leaned against a railing, exhausted. Vorak approached him. "You've changed the council's perception." "I didn't do it for that." "Then why?" Gavran looked at the Warbeast. "Because something broken doesn't mean it's worthless." "It just needs someone to believe it can be fixed," Kryn muttered. "Sentimental nonsense." But the next day, the Mordren were reinstated into the peacefront negotiations. Hostilities eased. The Warbeast, though still damaged, was displayed as a symbol of recovered strength. And Gavran, limping but alive, returned to the human delegation's quarters, where a technician handed him a warm cup of synth coffee and a data slate full of repair logs. "Rest," the technician said. "You earned it." Gavran took the cup, sat down, and stared out the viewport at the spire lights flickering on across the city. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt tired. But somewhere out there, the galaxy had stopped laughing, and sometimes that was enough. The floor of Hangar 12 shook with each step the Warbeast took, not from grandeur, but from imbalance, its new gait uneven but purposeful. Gavran adjusted the calibration node on his wrist pad, watching the creature negotiate a slope of debris left from an abandoned test rig. "Your override delays are stacking again," said Lyra, one of the Mordren engineers, her lower arms folded while the upper ones tapped through a diagnostics interface. "Your patchwork is corrupting the movement queue." "It's not corruption," Gavran replied, crouching to inspect one of the auxiliary stabilizers. "It's prioritizing survival paths. Adaptation through inconsistency. That's how it learns." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "That's not how Mordren systems are meant to function." Gavran didn't look away from the stabilizer. "Then maybe they weren't built to survive the wrong kind of damage." A klaxon blared overhead. The Warbeast froze. Gavran stood slowly, his back aching from too many hours hunched under armor plating. An orange light pulsed across the hangar ceiling. Lyra's face drained of color. "That's not a drill," she said. On the far side of the hangar, a squad of uniformed Mordren rushed in, weapons drawn. One of them barked a command that Gavran didn't understand, but the Warbeast responded anyway. Its tail slammed into the floor, sending a concussion through the metal decking. "Why is it moving?" Lyra hissed. It's not cleared for deployment, it's not, Gavran muttered. It's reacting. The squad raised their weapons. The Warbeast turned its head toward them, a low rumble building in its chest. Stand it down. A voice shouted from behind the squad. It was Vorok, striding in with his gauntlets off and his expression unreadable. This facility is under lockdown. There's been a breach. Gavran stepped between the Warbeast and the squad. You think it's responsible? Vorok ignored the question. A Varn transport was destroyed 2 clicks outside the perimeter. No survivors, no comms, no trace signatures. Then what caused it? We don't know. But it wasn't ours. That was 4 hours ago. Now Gavran sat on a cold alloy bench just outside the central command deck. A frowned security officer passed him a protein bar, which he accepted with one hand while feverishly scrolling through schematics with the other. You're not going to find your answers in that mess, said a voice from behind him. He turned. It was Ambassador Henrix, no longer in his silks but in a reinforced flight suit, sleeves rolled up to reveal old burned scars. Didn't think you'd be hanging around after the show, Gavran said. I don't leave when the theater catches fire, Henrix replied. Especially when the actors start improvising, meaning someone knew the Mordren would bring that Warbeast, someone knew you'd fix it, and someone wanted to see how far it could go. Gavran stood. You think this is a setup? I think someone wants to see what happens when the fragile line between alliance and escalation gets kicked in the shins. Vorok approached, his jaw set tight. The council's in emergency session. They want the Warbeast decommissioned until further notice. That'll kill it, Gavran said. It's not alive. It's learning. Vorok's eyes flicked to Henrix. You're letting the humans speak for your machines now, Henrix shrugged. He seems to be the only one who understands them. 2 hours later, Gavran was back inside the Warbeast's neural chamber, a cramped, pulsing space filled with cables and organic filaments. He plugged his tablet directly into the core node and pulled up the last memory imprint. Don't touch that, said a voice to his left. A young Trelawney in an Envoy Corps uniform hovered near the wall, his translucent skin faintly glowing blue. That junction controls the emotion dampener. I didn't know it had one, Gavran said. It didn't. Not until you rewired it with a Varn cell. You changed its pain thresholds, now it's forming associative patterns. Gavran stared at the data flow. It's afraid. The Trelawney's glow dimmed. Yes, and it's angry. Gavran shut the interface down. Who else knows? No one. If the council finds out, they'll dismantle it piece by piece just to see where you went wrong. I didn't go wrong. I gave it a reason to stand. The Trelawney hesitated. You should talk to the Severin, Gavran frowned. The Severin haven't left their orbit station in over a decade. They're here. They requested a private audience with you. 6 hours after the lockdown, Gavran stood in a gravity-neutral chamber with 3 Severin elders floating silently before him. Their forms were shrouded in a mist of neural ink, their boundaries indistinct, as if they refused to obey the definition of edges. You altered a Mordren construct, one of them said, each syllable vibrating in Gavran's chest rather than reaching his ears. I stabilized it. You gave it reflexive cognition. I gave it a chance. The chamber dimmed. Another voice, deeper, older. You did not ask permission. I didn't know I needed it. You do now. Gavran took a step forward. Are you going to stop me? Silence. Then, you are not the threat, but you will be the excuse. He left the chamber with his heart pounding. Vorok met him in the corridor. The council is splitting. Half want the Warbeast destroyed. Half want to use it to track whoever hit the Varn convoy. What do you want? Vorok didn't answer immediately. I want to know if it will obey you. It doesn't obey me, it trusts me. That's worse. Later that night, Gavran sat beside the Warbeast in the maintenance bay. Its eye had dimmed to a low amber glow. He rested a hand on the outer hull. I know you're in there, he said. The Warbeast shifted slightly enough to acknowledge him. Someone's setting us up. I don't know who. But if you keep walking, we might find out. The Warbeast let out a low, mechanical exhale. Gavran stood. We leave at first light. He limped out of the bay, not looking back. Behind him, the Warbeast systems began to power up independently of any command. At dawn, the alarms went off again. Something had breached the outer perimeter. Not a ship, not a drone, something walking. And it didn't belong to anyone in the peacefront. By the time Gavran reached the command deck, the display showed a silhouette emerging from the dust storm outside the spire walls. Tall, asymmetric. Moving with deliberate, unnatural grace, Lyra stood beside him. "That's not one of ours." "No," Gavran said. "That's what they wanted to see the Warbeast fight." Vorak entered, already strapping on body armor. "You said it trusts you." "Prove it." "I need 15 minutes to patch the last targeting relay." "You have 8. Outside, the wind howled. The silhouette drew closer. And in the hangar, the Warbeast rose to its feet unprompted. By the time Gavran reached the outer barrier, the intruder had already cleared the perimeter. It didn't run. It didn't stagger. Each step it took was measured, like it had been built to walk through gunfire and not notice. The thing had no symmetry. Its limbs were mismatched, one arm ending in a multi-blade appendage, the other terminating in a blunt, rotating core that shimmered with kinetic charge. Its surface was a shifting patchwork of alloy scales and translucent film, as if it couldn't decide what material it was made of. The defense turrets didn't fire. Not because they'd been disabled, but because the intruder wasn't tagged by any known threat profile. The system froze in decision logic. Vorak barked a command to his squad, who raised their weapons and spread out along the barricade. Gavran ignored them and moved straight to the Warbeast, which waited at the hangar threshold, its stance low, its gait uneven but steady. "Follow," Gavran said, not shouting, not commanding. Just giving it a choice. The Warbeast moved. They crossed the northern cordon, stepping into the open field beyond the spire's shadow. The ground was still soft from the night frost, and Gavran's boots sank with every step. The thing approaching didn't leave footprints. It stopped 20 meters out. No eyes, no visible sensors, just a faceplate of undulating glass that reflected nothing. The Warbeast flexed its claws and let out a low, grinding tone that rattled Gavran's teeth. He glanced at the telemetry feed on his wristpad. Biometric feedback loops were spiraling. The Warbeast was not just alert. It was reacting with a pattern he couldn't trace. The intruder extended its bladed arm, not in aggression, but in something like acknowledgement. The filament tips shimmered, and suddenly Gavran's pad went dark. His retinal HUD blinked out. Static washed over his ear implant. "Vorak, we've lost spectrum contact," Gavran said. "It's jamming passively." "Then stop talking and start acting," Vorak growled through the local channel. The Warbeast took a step forward. The intruder moved, not fast, not lunging, just a shift of weight, and Gavran blinked and it was behind the Warbeast. Gavran dropped to a knee instinctively, hand snapping to the emergency bypass panel on the Warbeast's flank. The machine pivoted, too slow. The intruder struck low, its blade arm slicing across the Warbeast's rear leg joint. Sparks burst. The Warbeast staggered. Gavran jammed 2 leads into the panel and overrode the mobility governor. The Warbeast's damaged leg locked straight, compensating with sheer torque. It turned with a snarl of servos and launched forward, slamming into the intruder with its shoulder. The impact knocked the thing back, but not down. It rolled with the hit and landed upright, blade arm twitching erratically. Gavran ducked as a shockwave pulsed out from the creature, non-lethal but disorienting. His balance vanished. He dropped to all fours while rising in his throat. Behind him, the Warbeast roared. It charged again, this time aiming low. The creature jumped higher than it should have been able to and landed atop the Warbeast's back, driving the blade down. The outer armor cracked. Gavran forced himself upright, blinking through tears. He reached into his belt pouch and yanked free a thermal coil, slapping it against the panel and initiating a core loop reroute. The Warbeast shuddered, then it flared, not light. Heat. The entire surface of the Warbeast vented excess energy in a burst that seared the air. The creature recoiled, leaping clear, but its faceplate now shimmered with fractures. Gavran's nose bled. He wiped it without looking. "Now," he muttered. The warbeast surged forward, claws extended. It didn't go for a grapple, it went for the creature's legs. The first swipe caught the right knee joint. The second cleaved through the left ankle. The creature fell. For a moment, everything was still. And then the intruder unfolded. It didn't scream. It didn't flail. It expanded. Its outer shell split into segments, revealing a lattice of pulsing nodes that began to hum in a frequency too low to hear but deep enough to feel. Gavran staggered back. The warbeast froze, sensors overloading. The hum intensified. Gavran yanked the emergency release on the warbeast's neural feed. The hum cut off. The warbeast slumped, but not down. Its systems cycled into hard reset. The creature twisted, trying to rise. Gavran ran. He reached the downed warbeast and climbed onto its back, pulling open the top maintenance hatch. Inside, the core chamber flickered with unstable light. He jammed a diagnostic spike into the main relay, rerouting all power to propulsion. The warbeast surged upright and launched forward, tackling the intruder with full mass. They rolled, a chaos of limbs and sparks. The warbeast locked its claws around the creature's torso and drove it into the ground with a seismic crunch. Gavran hit the override. The warbeast's fusion core vented all remaining energy through its chest plate, a directed plasma burst. The creature disintegrated, not exploded, not burned. Disintegrated? What remained was a fine mist of carbonized dust and one small metallic shard. The warbeast collapsed beside it, not dead, not destroyed. But inert. Gavran dropped beside it. His leg throbbed. Blood soaked through his pants. He felt the sting of exposed muscle grinding against the inside of his knee brace. He didn't care. Vorak arrived minutes later, followed by 2 security teams and a medical drone. Gavran waved off the drone and pointed to the shard. "Scan that." "It's the only thing that didn't atomize." Henriks arrived just as the analysis finished. "No known alloy. No matching origin trace," the tech officer said. "It's not from any Peacefront faction." Henriks knelt beside Gavran. "You all right?" "No. Will you be? Eventually." Lyra stood over the warbeast. "It's not responding, it's resting," Gavran said. "Let it." By midday, the council had reconvened, not in panic, in focus. The Mordren were cleared of suspicion. The Peacefront issued a joint directive to investigate the origin of the intruder. No accusations, no retaliation, just resolution. The warbeast remained offline. Gavran spent the evening in the infirmary. The medics cleaned and stitched his leg, applied a dermal mesh, and ran a nerve region sequence that made him curse in 3 languages. "You're lucky," the medic said. 2 more inches and you'd have lost the tendon." "I'm always lucky," Gavran said. He limped back to the hangar at dusk. The warbeast hadn't moved. He sat beside it. "You saved all of us," he said. The warbeast's eye flickered once, then it powered down completely. No fanfare, no ceremony. A week later, it was converted into a standing monument just outside the treaty spire, not as a weapon, as a reminder. Kryn passed Gavran on the observation deck and paused. "I underestimated you. I'm used to that. Humans confuse me. We confuse ourselves." Kryn nodded, then walked away. Gavran leaned on the railing, watching the sun rise over Zelvago's prime. His legs still ached. His hands bore new scars, but the galaxy hadn't burned. "I'll take that," he muttered to no one, and then he went inside. There was still work to be done, but not today.